Let's go. What's going on? Dude, I can't believe it. It is Friday, August 20th already. I feel like time is going by super quick. Welcome to the Artists of Data Science Happy Hour. Super excited to have all of you guys here. Hopefully, you got a chance to tune into the live session I did earlier this week on Wednesday. Did a live session with Or Lenchner. So, for those of you catching this on the podcast, make sure you head over to my LinkedIn page to catch the interview that I did with Or. It's also going to be released on the podcast in just about a week or so. So definitely tune into that. Also, be sure to tune into the episode that I released today with David Benjamin, who's the author of Cracking Complexity, which is a hell of a book. Absolutely love that book. It's free on Audible Prime or whatever it's called, the premium subscription of Audible. So if you guys have that, definitely look for that book because it's a great read, great listen. Super excited to have everybody here, man. Shout out to all the friends. Vin, what's going on? Tom, what's going on? Albert, Tashi, Eric, Marina, Clint, Makiko's in the house. Spencer, what's going on? Russell, how's it going, man? Super excited to have all of you guys here. I'm ready to get this office hour or rather happy hour kicked off. Let's do this, man. I've got a question. I'm wondering. I've been thinking a lot, you know, about well planning a data science project, right? Like typically when you're doing some type of project management or planning for some project, you like to have these neatly kind of defined timelines, like saying, hey, look, by next Tuesday at 4:30 p.m., Bob, I'm going to have the insights that you are looking for. But I don't know if that is the best way to work in data science, right? I'm wondering if I can get you guys' perspective on this when it comes to planning, project management in data science. Does this kind of predefined waterfall method work, or do we need something a little bit more flexible and organic, for lack of a better word, just due to the exploratory nature of the work that we do? I'm gonna start with Vin on this one to get his perspective, and then after that, I'd love to hear from Tom.
Yeah, I think so. There's different types of data science. Some data science acts like a software development project. And so for shops like that, you can actually run agile because really it's leaning in that direction anyway. So you can run agile, you can run waterfall, you can run whatever you want to. You can make up, you can run docile. You can, so you can run whatever the typical software development methodologies are. But then when you start getting into actual research and doing research, you need a totally different process to handle research because it doesn't go in a straight line. It's cyclical. Anytime you start doing iterative data gathering, so even data engineering can be a cyclical process. And so that doesn't work with things like waterfall. And if you try to slap it into an agile framework, people want to give you these, these tasks and items and say, okay, when's this going to be done? Well, I'm on iteration 4. I'll let you know. And so that's, it's a totally different process. And if you need to manage something like research, you have to go in a completely different direction. You have to have a gated process in place where you're not so much managing when will it be done as much as continually evaluating how much progress is being made and saying, okay, I like not only the amount of progress that's being made, but also the direction it's being made in. And you're making a financial decision to continue funding, a whole lot like the academic side works, where, do we continue to fund this project? And there's a committee that looks at it and says, okay, we're going to renew funding this year. And you really do the same thing. And that's a different type of project management framework. And businesses are slowly starting to understand they need it, but I haven't seen it implemented in a whole lot of shops yet.
So does that tend to work better in like so you mentioned research versus software development type of environment? Like I kind of a naive question here, but how do we tell which type of data science team that we're on, and how do we tell which is going to work for the thing that we are attempting to deliver on?
Well, it depends on how certain you need to be about the actual solution, the model that you deliver. The more certain you need to be about it, you either go very, very simple model that's easy to explain and easy to understand, or if you go the complex route, now all of a sudden, obviously, you're going into the research route because you have to create experiments to validate whatever it is that you've built in that model. So you have the traditional model development life cycle, but you have this additional validation to the front of it because the more complex the problems that you end up solving for the business or for customers, and the more complex solutions that you're forced into, because I'm not a huge fan of going complicated if you don't have to. But when you start getting forced into more complex solutions, if you need an experimental process. And that's really the cue of, okay, if I'm doing experiments, I'm doing research, and that's something different.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Vin. For everybody that just joined in, the opening question I led here with was, what type of project planning, project management process makes the most sense for data science team? Vin was talking about two different kind of flavors of data science team. You got your research oriented team versus kind of a implementation deployment type of base team. And I really like those insights, Vin. Thank you so much. Let's go to Tom on this one, and then Makiko. I thought I saw you here. I'd love to hear from you if you are still around. Tom, go for it. And then, by the way, if anybody else has questions on anything, please do let us know right there in the chat, whether you're in the Zoom call or joining us on LinkedIn, YouTube, or Twitch. For the one person who watches on Twitch, Tom, go for it.
Yeah, I love Vin's answer. And I just want to take a Tony Stark approach in the first Iron Man. Is it too much to ask for both? In other words, after studying Dennis's book and listening to his videos, Dennis Rothman, it started to occur to me, wait a minute, when we're building a machine learning pipeline, when we've got all our development mechanisms and we're trying different things, we're cycling through different models. But some of those models are more easy to use for explaining what's going on. It may not be the model we put in production, but that doesn't mean we can't still use that model to explain a lot of our discovery work. For example, I'm always using linear logistic regression. David Langer's always using decision trees and random forest. Both of those can explain a lot more. You may not put them in production, but I tell you what, as soon as I've scaled my features and I've found out what features are most important, I'm running off to tell the business that right away. Oh, well, do you have a predictive model yet? No, but you can act on this data here. Now back to the bigger question. Greg and I even designed a talk together on this. It's business and data science collaboration to maximize return on data. And the big highlight in that talk, we show that it's really important to take your current business priorities and your current data assets and look for the intersections. And the strongest intersection point is where you have all the data and it's a high priority, but there may be higher business priorities. That's just a clue. Go collect more data assets until you have enough to do a good job. So that's just a thought. Now, my co-author on the book I'm writing, Guy Sankari, brilliant. I hope you're all following him. Guy Sankari, Ghaith. He really borrows a lot of wisdom from our software development gurus with all their techniques, and says we need to leverage from their wisdom. Yes, we do things a bit differently, but that doesn't mean we completely throw out things. We modify what we need. So we're early in this data science age. Take the current wisdom, modify it. Don't feel completely stuck to it, and use that wisdom that's already there. That's what I gotta say.
Thank you very much, Tom, the data gun. Shout out to Monster Cat Silk for giving us the dope beats all day long. If you guys do not listen to that streaming channel on YouTube, oh my God, the beats are amazing. Makiko, what about you? What do you think?
All right, so I think my answer is going to be, I guess, kind of a little bit dumb, but in terms of like what process you should use for your project, I would say like look at the culture and the process of the team that you're going into. So if you're doing it individually, and it's like a one-off project, like you can come up with whatever project management methodology that will work for you. But the minute that you start trying to get that model like into production, you're gonna like, unless you're like that kind of like the full stack or the unicorn, like data scientist engineer, which, not really supportive of the industry, kind of forcing people to be one of everything. Unless you're one of those, right? Like at some point you're going to have to come up, you're going to bump up to like 3 teams. One is product, basically going like, is this feature something that is useful, that is valuable for the business? Secondly is engineering. How do you get the model or, the data science assets into production such that it can be used, whether it's internally for like forecasts or externally for like a recommendation feature. And the third team you're going to kind of like run into potentially is like strategy or finance, essentially money bags, like who carries that money. So depending on the size of the company, it could be, a very lean, small team of just engineers and like one PM who is like a product manager and a project manager. Other times you can have like a very fully scaled system, right? So I'd say number one, it's if you're going into like a big company, try to adopt the system that they have, because it's just a much harder fight, especially if you're coming in like at an IC or junior level. And secondly, like what I've seen is that, for some companies where they like have like the infrastructure and system, they'll treat it very much like agile. Some things you might kind of circle around, like you implement the model and then you decide like, or figure out it's just not working, right? So you got to go back to the drawing board, but the company still wants the feature. They still want to like recommend these products. They just might go about it a different way, but like they have the pipeline infrastructure already set up, right? But could be a startup where they're kind of building it from scratch, right? Like ground up. You are, number 10 person at startup and you're number one data scientist. There, you might just have to be a lot more flexible because you're kind of like building the plane as you're flying it, very seat of your pants. You're going to acquire some tech debt, or whatever. So you're just going to have to sort of make it work. So, I mean, that would be my answer is, wherever you go, especially if it's a bigger, more complex company, kind of figure out what they're doing already, see how you can plug into it. And if you do find areas to optimize, like, just work it in kind of gently, and just, data science team sport, right?
Yeah, yeah. I usually favor methodologies that are just flexible, right? That you can move. You got to be fluid and flexible, and then that agility part is a key. And like I mean, agile in the sense of just moving quick, falling down fast, getting up even quicker. I don't want to say fail fast because that's so cliche, but damn it. But yeah, so I mean, I'd love to actually hear from Greg on this. I know you just joined, Greg, but the question I opened with was kind of along the lines of how do we manage our work as data scientists, right? Like, typical project management likes to have defined scope, defined requirements, saying, next Tuesday, 4:30 p.m., have an insight for us. But it doesn't really work like that in data science, right? I'm wondering what you think.
Let me warn Greg that I did mention our talk, Greg, but only briefly.
Yeah. So I want to make sure I capture the essence of the question well. So it's kind of like, how do you manage your day-to-day versus manage your strategic projects? How do you quantify that?
Well, kind of, I guess more so, how do you go about managing your entire, I guess, work as a data scientist, right? Like we start up a project and we say, all right, cool. Like in 2 weeks, we want to have this thing, that thing figured out and insights delivered and packaged and sealed. But the work that we do is really exploratory by nature. So it's kind of hard to find that balance between wanting to deliver quickly while still exploring the data and making sure you've kind of left no stone unturned.
Yeah. So I think you need to capture most of the task inside of a tracking tool. And inside of the scoping phase, you want to make sure you tackle all the to-do list. And with that, you want to truncate it into deliverables. I think you've answered that partially inside of the question itself, is that you can never put a finite time for data science projects because of the exploratory nature of it. So, but you have to hold yourself and your team accountable for delivering something. And with that, you have to have deliverables. So what I will call milestones with target dates. And these dates are not finite. They have to move as you evolve. The thing is, you keep tracking your progress towards those deliverables. And if there are obstacles that prevent you from reaching these deliverables, you update them. And through that tracker, you're surfacing these obstacles and pulling the right team members to help you remove these obstacles and move towards them one by one. So they cannot be it should be an iterative process. It should be a dynamic process. There's no set in stone date that you should set, for these projects. At the end of the day, what matters the most is that through scoping, you're capturing all the to-do list and you have alignment across the board in terms of what needs to be done to achieve the project. So in that scoping phase, everyone involved, all stakeholders need to align with it. For when there's an obstacle, there's a clear method, or RACI, what I would call responsible, accountable, consulted, informed people who understand when to intervene to remove these obstacles to ensure that the progress of that project is continuing.
Thank you very much, Greg. Tom, you said you wanted to add something here, and then after that, I see Russell has some great comments here, and then maybe if Eric or Monica want to take a stab at this question, let me know. If not, then we can continue on to other questions that we got. Got one coming in from Jacob, and anybody watching on LinkedIn or on YouTube, if you guys have questions, let me know. I will add you to the queue. So please do let me know. Go for it.
So two quick items. The first one is far more important. I forgot that you can play background music while you're on a Zoom call. So I am listening to Monster Cat Silk while we talk. That's a score. But the second thing, which is just mildly important, I'm going to make a confession here. I'm one of those types that wants to release beauty, function, super accurate. That's the worst way to go about our work. If we really are delivering some predictions, if our predictions are better than average, like using the average, we're already adding value. So get it into production, but make sure you're constantly improving that model. I can't emphasize this enough, and I'm confessing I suck at this, but I've learned, get a tracer bullet, release crap, call it crap, and say I promise to keep improving it.
I like that tracer bullet terminology from Andy Hunt, pragmatic programmer. Good one there, Tom. Russell, then Monica has got some great comments here as well. So let's go to Russell, then Monica. Russell, are you? Nope. Go for it. Looks like Russell is having some technical difficulties. Monica, go for it. You have some great comments here.
Sure. I think that it's super important to be transparent to the stakeholders and realistically, like what you can get done in a particular time frame. You'll run into a lot of problems with data, trying to find the data, trying to connect to the data, gather the data, clean the data, and all of that. And a lot of times that isn't known from those end users. They just think that it's just a magic product that they can get in a day or two. So just being upfront and realistic about that. And then also super important from my experience in having frequent periodic meetings to show them the progress that you've made and to tell them about any like roadblocks that you have.
Russell is still, looks like incapacitated, but Mikiko has some great comments here in the chat too. Mikiko, would you mind sharing that with the world?
Yeah, I was going to type up another thing too. Like I think in data science and machine learning and engineering, I think all the fields that are like super quantitative and technical, like I think we, as in the royal we, I think we have a really bad habit of basically wanting to like promise the moon and then being really, really like disappointed internally in ourselves if we don't do it. And if you think about that's like a very like outcome sort of oriented mindset. And it's like, exactly like Tom's point, it's actually better to like have a model or an analysis or dashboard shipped with like your minimum viable thing that works, that you can trust and verify, and then you can always add on afterwards. But like, especially too, like with the business partners, I mean, the reality, right, is that like everyone kind of has to chart their sort of like career like, the course of their career, and trust is such a huge part of it. And so it's one of these things where like your key stakeholders, like I think people who work in data and machine learning, for the most part, like for example, I've heard people say, like, oh, the product manager is not giving us any slack. It's like how early did you have the conversation with them, right? Like, you don't want to be like, the worst case scenario is like you have basically, in the process of wanting to please people, you've basically told product like, oh yeah, we totally gonna get that feature out by like Q4, I don't know, 2020. And then you go and do the data analysis and you're like, oh man, like we got garbage. We can't do anything with this. And it's not even like if you push a model, it's neutral. It's like, if we push a model, this will actively hurt the company, right? Either in like the baseline or something like that. So you never want to be in that situation. And I think like that part of that is that whole wanting to, be very service oriented, wanting to provide the best. And also there's competition too, right? Like it's a competitive area. So, and I think it's good to like sort of give yourself that slack and understand that like, look, it doesn't always have to be like you're promising like, we're going to make the company 20 million more dollars, but maybe what you can sort of promise that you will do your due diligence. You will like check all the boxes to ensure that, if the product can succeed, it will be a good, viable, resilient thing. It just might not be the most amazing thing. So that was kind of sort of what I was thinking about, is that like, being service oriented, sometimes it's a really good thing, but sometimes it can really like hurt you, especially if you're afraid to like talk to your business partners.
Thank you very much, Makiko. Some great insights coming in. Appreciate all this. Russell, are you back? We're unable to hear you. No worries. We'll circle back to Russell. Let's keep it moving. Jacob has a question. Let's get to Jacob's question. Russell, have you tried turning it off and then turning it back on? That might work. Jacob, let's go to you.
Yeah. Hi everybody. Yeah. So for a while, I've been working as a data intern with a prop tech startup in the UK. So I actually resigned in July. So I was told to probably hold on for a while. So today I was made a full-time data analyst, like junior data analyst. And so there's a challenge actually, because it happens that I'm only the only person on the team, because my manager and my colleague resigned last month. So they brought in someone new who's not too familiar with our data processes. So I'll be doing most of the work, like building data models, creating dashboards. And so part of my responsibility is to probably gather new data insight for the marketing team. So I actually don't have like prior experience in that regard, because previously I have to be guided or probably be told what to do and do X, Y, Z and stuff. So I'm just a bit nervous. So I need like, okay, like guide what I can do, how to scale up and stuff like that, basically.
That's a hell of an opportunity, man. I think that's awesome. That's an awesome position to be in. Let's get some tips coming from. Let's start with Vin, then go to Eric, and then either Monica or Makiko. Would love to hear from you guys, but Vin.
I'll do that guy. I'll do the that guy answer to start out with, so everybody can do a better answer after me. So what specifically, I mean, talk to me about the project. What do you feel like you don't have in order to do the project that you're tackling? Do you have you gotten to the point where you've like done a skills assessment on yourself?
Yeah. So as of yesterday, I was told to extract data, like do like ETL from our event platform for basically streaming, then load the data, then create a dashboard. So there's a dashboard in place already. First, I need to create like a third-party and dashboard, which I did. I think that was part of the recommendation I got for them to retain me. Yeah, and so I could do basic analysis export, clean data, data wrangling, create reports. But I feel like I'm not there like 100%. So I feel like, okay, maybe I don't have the core competence, maybe asking the right data questions and also relating with stakeholders, basically.
What I find with people who are in your position is that you're underestimating yourself. Somebody called a project something different, and you're probably feeling like, okay, well, this is actually something different, and it isn't. Typically, the business will bring you problems that you've seen before, and they'll put different language around it, and it'll make you feel like you're missing skills when you probably aren't. And so my advice is going to be backwards. I would start working a bit on the project and stub your toe a few times, and say, okay, I don't know this. I actually don't know this. And then that's going to be a first area to study, and stub your toe a little bit more and say, oh, I actually don't know this. Because what you're going to find is you are way more competent after doing analysis, ETL, building out the pipelines and doing what you've told me you've done. You're way more competent to take on, a project. And it sounds like it's a dashboard project. And it sounds like it's a fairly simple analytics project. And so you're probably more capable than you know. And so what I would do is start by figuring out what it is that this project requires that you don't have yet. And the only way you're going to do that is to get a few steps into it. And don't be afraid to experiment around and find stuff that doesn't work, and begin to, create a learning journey based on a little bit more certainty about what you do know and what you're capable of delivering versus what you actually don't know. Because you can spend a lot of time learning stuff that you didn't really need. And that's the biggest advice I can give you, is just avoid learning stuff you don't need and figure out what it really is that you need to learn.
Let's go to thank you very much, Vin. Let's go to Greg, and then if anybody else would like to chime in, let me know. After Greg, we can go to maybe Eric and Mikiko or Monica. Go for Greg.
Yeah, I wanted to add on top of what Vin was saying. I think one powerful thing I see people do who early on is understanding where the data comes from or how the data is generated with regards to the business processes. So if you know which business process you're trying to improve or help somehow, find out the list of your use cases from the business side. Find someone on the business side who can help you understand the data. I've been interviewed a lot by folks in tables that I'm familiar with, and they ask me, how does it make sense with regards to the processes that I manage on the business side? And then start documenting what it means for you, so you can have your own understanding of this data. So what you're doing, you're mapping this data flow with the existing business processes. And by documenting this, you're becoming a powerful person who can now even educate other business folks, educate other technical folks. So start doing those interviews with key folks who understand what these business processes are, and then map them out with the origin of that data, so you can understand these tables, where they're coming from. You understand why they're dirty. You understand whether you need to clean them or not, and start exploring how this data is stored, and so you can have a better way of manipulating them. That will make you very powerful.
Okay. Good tips there. Yeah, that's the cheat codes to success right there. Thank you, Greg. Eric. Go for Eric.
Say that first off, when it comes to whether or not you're asking the right question. So I just started in my job in my company about 2.5 months ago, and I still don't feel like I ask the right questions. I just ask all the questions. And sometimes I feel like I ask dumb questions, and sometimes I feel like I ask good questions. I have asked certain people the same questions multiple times, because sometimes things are just complicated or hard to remember, or it's just you're only human, and you're trying to take in a crap ton of information very quickly. And so I think you just have to give yourself a little bit of grace, because you can only learn so much so fast. Even if it's all thrown at you very quickly, you can't catch it all. And so just ask all the questions, take lots of notes, and and you'll find as you do, the other thing about that, other benefit is when you ask the questions, people hear you, people see you, so you've gained visibility and shown like, hey, I'm a person who asks questions, I'm a person, I'm here, I'm real. And so they know that you're there, and you become, now you're a coworker, you're part of the team. And that's an important thing. That's an important piece to build. Is not because you not for a selfish reason, but because like they need to know like you are part of the herd or the pack or whatever aggregation of animals you prefer to be, like, and just know that you're there and a part of their community.
All right, thanks, Eric.
Kiko, let's hear from you.
Oh yeah. If you want to also find out fun names for like groupings of animals, you should look that up, because there's
Sure.
there's like a flotilla of gators, and there's some fun stuff there. Yeah, something I do. So I guess two things. So I remember when I had first like moved to finance. I was working as an analyst there, and I was terrified because I was surrounded by all these MBA types, and it was just the culture shock was real. Because these were all Wall Street types. They were in suits. I came in with sweatpants and like a button down because I was running late. One of them was like, "Aren't you a bit junior to be like doing casual Thursdays?" And I was like, "Oh man." But two things that I think for me I noticed, like, so one, for example, like when you ask questions, sometimes it can kind of feel like if you're asking a question, it feels very elementary. So I would sort of like rephrase the question. So for example, there was a number of different ways to like calculate like revenue or like annual revenue. So instead of asking them like, what does annual revenue mean? I would go, how is annual revenue calculated here? Like what are the fields or data? What is the field or data used? And I could say like, because when I've seen it in other places, this is how it's calculated. I want to know what the mapping is to the data, right? So that's one way to kind of phrase it, where it's like I know the concept, there's this specific part of it that I'm missing. Because people would use the same name for like different calculations. And I remember when I was first going into finance, I was like, oh yeah, there's like one definition for everything. And there might be one definition, but there's actually like a million implementations based off of where you go. So that's one thing I would do, is I would just try to phrase the question in a way. So I'm still asking the question, but it kind of makes me feel a little bit better. But I'm still asking it. That's the important part, is to still ask the question. And then I think the second part, what I would do is when I'm taking notes, I'll I'll list all like in three parts, all the facts, all the sort of assumptions, and then all the unknowns. Because what that does is it empties out your brain, because sometimes you can be stuck in like paralysis analysis, like, oh my God, like, well, so like ETL, for example, like, what does ETL mean? Like, what do they want with ETL? What da 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 da. And then what you can just do is you can say like, okay, like, the known is they want data to get transformed and dumped someplace else. The assumption, which may not be correct, and that's something to sort of confirm, right, is I need to pull data from X place to like Y place, right? So it's like you need to go from one location to another. But what they might actually mean, right, is like, oh, you can write your own scripts to like clean the data in the instance, right? So maybe in the dashboard, instead of writing an ETL script, you can find a way to write a macro within it so that it just recalculates values. But it's good to call out like what are the facts, like what are the assumptions, and then what are the unknowns. And then that way, for example, when you approach people and you're like, can you fill this in for me? Right. You can also confirm like, are these these assumptions correct? And based off those unknowns, like Vin said, right, like it does help to start working with the project, because then you can figure out what is the right sort of, like learning resources you need, right? Because for ETL, if you look it up, for example, a lot of people say like, well, ETL is IBM or, whatever tool technology. But maybe it's actually for your particular project, you might not even need to know all that. Maybe you just need to know like how to write a script and where to host it, or something like that, So that for me really helps, is writing notes and outlining specifically what it is I don't know, so I can go back and fill in the question. And then also when I ask people like, can you can you define this for me? Can you do XYZ for me? Because a lot of times business people, they'll say stuff and then they'll kind of assume that you know exactly like what they're talking about. And sometimes it's good to call them on that and go like, actually, we do not have the same definition or the same thing in mind.
Yeah, that was huge for me when I was at Bold Commerce. I had to, like, they're just throwing around a lot of words and a lot of terms, and like I was new to e-commerce at that, at that time, and I had like no clue what it meant. But then I was like, it doesn't mean I'm stupid if I ask questions. Like I would just possibly like, oh, you keep saying these like words, and I hear them, but they don't mean anything to me. Can you please just real quickly break it down? Tell me what this thing means, and what this means for the bottom line for the business, just so I can have some understanding. So it's completely okay to ask questions. No questions are really that dumb, unless they're intended to be dumb. Monica, go for it.
Yeah, just one other thing to add is just I'm all about transparency. So don't be afraid to say, you don't understand something and to ask questions. Something that I noticed in my audit days, they would feel kind of like attacked or something if you ask them, like, how does this business product work? Or, give me the definition of something. They would kind of be hesitant because they didn't want to say the wrong thing. So if you were to, like Mikiko was saying, like rephrase the question and like, how, do you view this business process? What do you think that would be helpful for me to know about such and such? So that's all I really had to add there. Everyone hit it on the nose though.
Thank you very much, Monica. Vin's got a comment here. I'm assertively ignorant. When I get jargon, I start asking questions with confidence about how little I know. Sounds strange, but works well. Yes, it does. I was in a meeting with some lawyers and accountants, and they just kept saying stuff. I had to pause them. I was like, yo, y'all motherfuckers keep talking with these words. I don't know what they mean. Like, quit talking to each other and talk to me and let me, what the hell are you guys talking about? Paying you guys all this money. Can't even talk to me. Yeah, that's true. Anyways, Jacob, how you feeling about that, man? Anybody else got any tips for Jacob? Shout out to Ben Taylor in the house. What up, Ben Taylor?
I think I feel awesome already.
Good, man, because you are awesome. No explanation for why you feel that way, because you are, man. Keep it going.
Yeah, thanks.
I will
I
say,
just gotta say real quick, Ben Taylor, you were freaking awesome today on Lights on Data. I really enjoyed listening to you a ton.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, dude, I missed that. I didn't know you were on Lights on Data this morning. How'd that go?
Oh, we were talking about meaning of life and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, you turned it into a Lex Friedman episode.
Yeah, I'm like,
yeah,
I've been nice to your kids. I guess that's a profound statement. I'm just kidding. Hey,
been listening to a lot of Lex Friedman lately. It's been interesting. It's been really doubling down on this. I've been really thinking hard about, well, not really thinking hard, just I have been thinking about AI ethics and stuff like that. I've been reading this book from Max Tegmark called Life 3.0. I don't know if you guys have checked it out yet or not, but I highly recommend it, or at least just listen to like the talks he gives around the book, or listen to the talk that he did with Lex Friedman. He paints a very interesting picture of what the world could look like in just our lifetimes, in just the next few decades, with all the advances that we're making. So if anybody has questions, let me know. I'm keeping an eye out on everywhere, on LinkedIn, on YouTube, and in the chat itself, and I don't see
I wanted to add one little thing from earlier. Greg and I, when we give our little talk together, we've been trying to, oh, did we lose? There he is. We've been trying to emphasize, look, we've got this, and by the way, I concede that not everything is a clean machine learning development pipeline in the work we do. I certainly haven't been doing anything that clean the last 2 years, but we talk about it a lot because it's the basics, it's the foundations, but you look, equate anything else you're doing to something like this. If 80% or more of our work is getting ready for modeling, getting the data ready for modeling, there's so much value we're discovering in that process. There's many stepping stones along that process where there's some key data we can go communicate back. I used the illustration of the feature weights for example, but there's other things along the way. And to me, one of the bigger things is you discover dirty data. Don't just write the cleaning routine for it. Go back to the data management system programmers or the data collectors and say, would you please not allow a null value here? Would you please make sure this is type checked? The little things like that just save enormous amounts of time later.
Thank you very much, Tom. Eric, with a very good observation. Meetings must have just ended in Mountain and Pacific time because a bunch of cool folks just got out into the chat. Shout out to the cool folks that just joined. Ben, what's up? Mark, what's up? Jai, what's going on? Super happy to have all of you guys here. Where do you guys want to take this next, man? I have no questions coming in.
I do have a question.
Oh, go for it. Yes, please.
Yeah. So do you guys think I guess, I don't know if there's a term for this, a good data scientist can become a good startup founder? And what does it take? You know, someone heavily in the research and data science get this idea and says, hey, I want to, oh, Benny's interested in this question.
Yeah.
And then it's like, look, I'm going to be a businessman now. Forget data science, but you know, let's do this.
I'm interested to hear what Ben's got to say because a successful entrepreneur with an exit as well. So go for it, Ben.
I think as data scientist, it'll sound like I'm generalizing. So if you're a data scientist, you're pretty smart. Like you're STEMmy, you know a lot of things. You're multidiscipline. And I think sometimes that can get you in trouble because you go into a startup, and sometimes people focus too much on the tech. They're like, we're going to go build this innovation. Deep learning is going to go faster. We're going to do this next big thing. It's going to be better. It's going to be faster. And I think the conversation that's missing usually is who's going to pay you and how much are they going to pay you. And just because something's cool or fast or interesting, it doesn't mean they're going to pay you. And so with our startup, I remember initially I was embarrassed when we get to pricing, which is hilarious because we should actually have a conversation. Like, why would I be embarrassed when I'm asking you to pay me 40,000 a year, 80,000 a year, 200,000 a year? It's because I'm not convincing you of the value. You know, I'm saying, hey, we've got this deep learning platform. You should really consider it. You can do some cool models. You can do some stuff. And so I think the word, so the answer to that question, Greg, is no and yes. It's a matter of how quickly you can get to value. And so if you care more about value than your customer, then you'll get there very quickly. If you fall in love with the tech and you forget value, then you will definitely fail. And I'm not speaking like I have all the answers, but I've definitely had my ass kicked. So that's the word of warning is get to value, not the value from the data science perspective, but the value from like the layman buyer who is willing to cut you checks, but cut you checks where they don't get fired, cut you checks where they get promoted. So
yeah, definitely makes sense. I do have a follow-up question, but definitely would like to hear other people on this in terms of startup. So
yeah. Do you want to go for your question? Otherwise, we could hear from Mark or Vin on this as well. Up to you.
Well, I wanted to hear the other responses first.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Let's go to Mark.
Hey, Greg. So definitely, I don't consider myself like a full-on founder, but I've tried a few times, and what I've realized is data science has not helped me be better at business. If anything, business has helped me be better at data science. And the reason being is like when I'm like going through the first iteration of like, all right, what's our business model? What's our TAM? Like how can I figure out these pieces and drive kind of like this something needs to happen now in the market. Many times, one, I don't have access to data to even work with to do those things. It's coming from a lot of user interviews, and that's like really qualitative data. And many times, like if you go straight to the data, like I don't even know if I need that, and I need to build all this infrastructure to even work with all that data. And like my time's better spent talking to potential customers and talking to potential investors and like thinking through this business idea and like where it fits within the market. And the data can come later. But because I spent a few times going through that iteration for my own ideas or for other startups, now when I go into my data science work, I'm like, oh shoot, like these things don't matter. Like what's going to drive the needle forward to like get like their first customer or like get some key customers and how it fits within this market and how does my insight fit within that. So I think data science does not make me better at pursuing my pursuing my passion for startups, but it does work in the reverse, where it's definitely helped me as a data scientist in the startup space.
Thank you, Mark.
Let's go to Makiko.
So I tried founding a startup that was ML based, and I don't want to say it didn't work, but I am not a part of that venture right anymore. And I think so. Here's kind of, I guess, it's kind of similar to what Mark was saying. I don't think working in data science hurt me. I think us sort of not having a strong, committed technical founder, I think that sort of hurt us more, frankly. Because I think, so the story, and there's part of the reason why I sort of like, started hopping on that project, was the story was good. The positioning was fantastic. The product, very well needed. I 100% understood like the segment, the market, but I think like not having like a strong like engineering co-founder that could help us with privacy, security, and also just infrastructure, like the DevOps stuff, that really, really hurt. And I think part of it was like a little bit of arrogance. I assume that because I worked as a data scientist and I did some code, right? That, I could figure out like, okay, the entire like AWS like infrastructure. And that just did not work. But I don't think working as a data scientist like hurts, right? Because I think especially if you're trying to push like an AI ML product. So for example, Josh Tobin and Sergey, right? Like they each, Sergey, who teaches full stack deep learning, right? Like I think co-founded, or he founded churnedin.com, and they use AI to detect whether or not you are plagiarizing, right? And Josh Tobin's, I think, working on something right now. It might be his first venture. So having that kind of language and that domain understanding, it does really help, I think. But I feel like the reason why a lot of AI ML startups probably don't work out, or it seems like they're working and then poof, like you find out later on that like, okay, $20 million of VC funding just went nowhere, is a huge part because they're not getting like the fundament. Like there was in Canada, I think there was a pretty well-known one that was like within the last year or two that happened, but they're not getting like the fundamentals right. And I think there's this like really fun quote from like Edith Wharton, who said it was like, all happy families are like in the same ways, all unhappy families are different in different ways. And I think like, startups who do really well, like there's a lot of things that have to go right. And also there has to be like that opportunity. And I think when startups fail, there could be a number of reasons why each one failed, right? They didn't get product market fit. They didn't develop the engineering. They didn't do X, Y, Z. They were doing something that ended up looking very similar to a patent that Apple and Google holds, and they got sued out the water, right? So it's really, they just didn't cover their like bases. So I feel like as long as you have, your foundation, your base is covered, and it doesn't have to be in the same co-founder. This is why a lot of VCs, they like two, they like people who have two, right? If someone dies, then the company can still go on. And I do know a VC where that happened to their company, like someone died, but they still had the other co-founder to keep it going. But part of it is also because different components of that team will bring sort of different skills and experiences and insight. So, I mean, that's just my 2 cents. Like, I think I would love to do it again in the future, but I think next time I'm like, now that I know how we get the story and the pricing and all that, it's about kind of like the foundation. You can't have AI ML if you just don't even have like a good engineering infrastructure for, like the regular like web mobile stuff. So.
Thank you, Mikiko.
You should all quit your jobs and go to a startup. You will learn something. I loved everything what you were saying, Mikiko. Totally agree.
Yeah. Aside from saying what Makiko said, just elaborating a little bit on a couple of her points. When you found a business, especially a startup, you're peeling back an onion of problems. And data scientists tend to be tacticians, which is problematic. We want to do stuff. We want to build stuff. We want to ship to customer. We want outcomes every day. And running a startup isn't like that. Running a startup is consistently slamming your head into a new problem every day, finding someone who can help you solve that problem, or sometimes learning an entirely new skill set to solve that problem. And a data scientist is kind of like a salesperson as a founder. When you get a salesperson as a founder, they think, okay, we've got a sales problem. Okay, every problem is a sales problem. We just have to sell harder. We got to sell better. We need a little bit of change to the product and we'll be able to sell. Data scientist is going to look at it and go, well, okay, so it's a data science problem. And you see it from that kind of one-dimensional worldview of the thing that you are so just day in and day out, that's what you do. And it's the same thing with salespeople. This is what they do. And so when they run startups, they tend to look at every problem as a sales problem. And data scientists tend to do the same thing. So like I said, you're peeling back this onion of problems. And to be a successful founder, you have to be a data scientist who doesn't mind solving a sales problem. You have to be a data scientist who can recognize that this is a product fit problem, that this is, I solved my problem with this. And if you look at all the ML ops tools that are out there, I solved my problem with my product. Now I have to talk to customers and solve theirs in order for this to really grow. And that's another type of problem. And it's not a data science problem. That's getting with customers and understanding. But the thing is, you can use data science to solve so many of these problems that we really get kind of pigeonholed into thinking, okay, it's just another data science problem. I just got to get some more data and I'll figure it out. And as a founder, if you don't have a good team around you that can pull you back, that you respect and trust, who can pull you back and say, look, Vin, it's not a data science problem. All right. We're not going to do this with, an algorithm and a massive amount of data gathering. And no, I'm just going to send a few of our people out to talk to our customers and we're going to figure this out. And so you really have to have a good team around a data scientist. But the second side is you have to have a data scientist who's willing to change and not use the hammer every day.
Thank you, Vin.
If I can add for a minute. Hey guys, this is my first meeting actually. So prior to this, actually, I ran my family business. So it was a small business. So it wasn't a startup. So I came to data science from an entirely different perspective. I came from, okay, I'm running a $50 million business. Technology is not a priority, like at all. Like you have technology, which you use sometimes, but we're not investing in what's the latest technology, how are we driving this technology, what technology are we getting? We're getting is what's driving the most to our value stream. And in most cases, I came from a quantitative background. That's what I did. And it was dealing with people, selling, dealing with lawyers, really business strategy, how are we improving our business model, our operating model, kind of like the talk that Vin, the stuff that Vin talks about in a lot of his topics. The focus is how are we improving our operating model, how are we driving value to our business. It's not really what technology comes after we have all these processes, after we have all the people in place. Because if you don't have the people, if you don't have the customers, technology is, at least to a small business that has $50 million in revenue, it won't work. It just doesn't work. It'll fail. So that's from my perspective.
Thank you, Manny.
Yeah, thank you. Greg, go for it.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I really love the discussion. I guess the follow-up question I have is that I was following an episode from Jason Calacanis, and he's like using the VC scene, and in terms of what you should expect or what VC firms, the legacy ones especially, what they expect is startups to come up with a team where there needs to be, and maybe Mikiko alluded to that, there needs to be someone who's strong in the technology side. Because if you show up by yourself and you show up as the business person, they might say, well, you're not, technically savvy, so we're not really interested in investing in your company. I guess, is that the right mindset that, VCs should have, or do we really need, a co-founder who's tech and a co-founder who's non-tech to have a solid solid startup that has a chance to survive the next phase of obstacles?
Someone's got to build it, someone's got to sell it, right? So Makiko, I see you have your hand up. Go for it.
Yeah, so as a result of basically not getting like an engineering oriented founder, we had to engage contractor services, which were spotty, cost money and equity. And when that project ends, that's when you find all the regressions in your code. And also too, like security and privacy is a new thing. So I think it's one of these things where like, there's a lot of things you can say about VCs, right? Some good, probably a lot of it bad. But at the end of the day, right, they're also business people. So they just want to see a return on their investment. So they're going to just basically try to mitigate that risk as much as possible. And that's like the unfortunate thing, right, is that it's known that if you're, for example, a woman, if you're LGBTQ, if you're a person of color and all that, right, like there are certain things about founders that will sometimes decrease their chances, which is like incredibly unfortunate. And the nice thing is that there are now like VC funds that are specifically, so Start Out, for example, they're very focused on LGBTQ. And there's like other female ones too. But at the end of the day, like they are just going to mitigate risk as much as possible. And so if you're selling like an engineering product and you don't have like, not necessarily like an engineering co-founder, right? Even if you have like a number 3 employees, like an engineer, right? Like as long as you can basically say like, I have the engineering resources where, we can build the product and all that, that will go a long way towards that risk mitigation. But there's other ways too that they could be a little bit concerned. So for example, you could have 2 engineers who just have no idea how to talk to people, no idea how to market, no idea the value prop. They show up in a meeting and the VCs are pitching them all these questions and the VCs are going like, oh man, like they're just saying yes to everything. Like, we're getting them on the equity. Like, what else are they going to say yes to? Are they going to like survive in the marketplace? Like, do they know the domain? So there's a lot of these ways that like kind of similar to an interview, right? Like the VCs can kind of pick out like, okay, well, we don't like this about this person. We don't like this about that person. We think they should have this and this, right? So it's one of these things where you just kind of have to cover a lot of those like core bases as much as possible in some way. And then at that point, I think it's kind of up to like the VC and up to like luck and opportunity to some degree.
Go to Mark, then Ben, then Tom.
Makiko's great point also reminded me something that came up when I was speaking to like angel investors and other VCs for our idea. And like the biggest thing that came up for me and my co-founder at that time was like, you're both first-time co-founders. And like, that's a huge risk for us to try to pursue that. And so the way we mitigated that was that we just spent weeks going through our network and trying to find someone who was open to join us on our idea, who was also already a founder and like had VC backing already before. And so once we added that person to the mix, one, they have the expertise of like how to navigate and also had connections within the space, but also like it like reduced like the level of hesitancy to like give money to people who are completely new to this. And so that was another key thing is like, are you a first-time founder? And so if you are, like the advice I receive is like partnering with someone who's actually gone through this process before, or at least getting a set of advisors that can like kind of like reduce your risk to potential investors.
Ben, go for it. Then after Ben, we'll go to Tom.
I think Tom was ahead of me.
Oh, Tom,
Tom?
go for it.
Ben, thank you. That's perfect because I kind of wanted to aim this question at you. I had a startup. I'm not going to say it's failed. It's just been on the shelf for maybe about a decade. But a question regarding this whole thing. Do y'all think it's conceivable or maybe preferable to make your initial startup, or at least one of the 10 initial startups you try, one that you can just launch by your own cash flow, by trying to follow both good tech and business practices? Because I've been part of other startups and I've seen all the classic mistakes that have been listed here today. I'll give an example. The most prevalent one, the most salient one from the things we've been talking about today, the guy that was leading the startup could not get his head out of the hardware, out of the tech. And he seemed to just be making boneheaded, stupid business moves and not leading the team very efficiently because he was always focused on the tech. But when I've talked to successful startup people, they've always affirmed when I've asked them, would you prefer to try to start where you're making it on your own cash flow instead of having to get investors? It's like no pause, yes. And I'm just curious, many of you think it's healthier to try to start that way? Because if it's pie in the sky thinking, I'd like y'all to shoot me down, because I actually think if you get to that level of business and tech ingenuity, it's so much better to launch that way. Ben, if you don't mind answering first, I was hoping you would.
Yeah. So with our startup, we had a lot of pressure from the CFO of HireVue, who was my friend, saying, try to hold on to the equity, try not to raise, like try to get to 1 million in revenue, 10 million in revenue. And I'm a big fan of raising. So if I went and did another startup, I'd raise as much as I could out of the gate rather than self-funding. Like maybe I'd get to like an MVP or something, or first customer if I could. But growth, like capital does so much, just the talent you can hire, the mistakes you can make. Data Robot, we've raised $1 billion. You can do a lot with $1 billion. I'm not saying like, that's a rare event, but raising any capital can be really useful. One of the concerns I had, Greg, with me when I was doing, or not Greg, Tom, one of the concerns I had with me is I always had these side projects. Like I had this super technical thing I was working on. And if you can raise capital, you can go full time, you can quit your other jobs, you can actually hire competent people, probably people on this call come join you and go after it. So but people have different opinions. My co-founder, he would not raise again. I would raise again. So you're always going to get two sides to that coin. One thing I wanted to bring up with this group is they're valuable lessons for criticism during the startup phase. And so, Greg, one of the lessons I learned is if you came to me and you're doing a startup and you said, hey, I landed my second customer, that should be a point of celebration. But what I've learned is depending on the details of your second customer, I could criticize you. I could say the second customer is too different from the first. And you could try to argue and say, no, like there's a platform play or the technology is being shared. But a fair criticism would be, but the deck you used to sell the second customer had nothing to do with the first customer. And the momentum you gained from the second customer did not earn you the first customer did not earn you the second customer. And so there's so much value when you do a startup and you come up with an idea, get those three customers in a line. They don't have to be big accounts, but just the fact that the first customer is helping you sell the second and the third, that is something that VCs talk about. Where when I was a young founder, that didn't make, I was so arrogant. Platform play, we support these data types and we sell to everyone. And that is a death knell to investors for good reason. I didn't understand that early on.
This is such a good point, Ben, because I feel like the way you're answering, you're saying too many startups slip into the specialist quadrant of cash flow quadrants instead of the business quadrant, is what I kind of hear you saying.
And the other thing I'm hearing too is that VCs are looking for some sort of virality score for a product, right? So this product, this customer spreads the word and it amplifies throughout. Thank you, Ben.
Yeah, the magic thing for them is, can you get to 3 to 5 customers? And if you can, because the issue that comes up that data scientists can trick themselves into is discounted consulting. And I say it's discounted consulting because if you actually went and charged your consulting rate, you would be making more than running after the startup. Oh, I'm doing this platform, I'm building this thing, this technology. If I looked at your hourly rate at what you're doing over here, it ends up being discounted consulting. And so sometimes you can trick yourself into doing all of this work and the momentum is not there. And Greg can only be scaled because it comes down to your scale factor. Like, what is Greg's scale factor? If you're working 100-hour weeks to deliver across 3 to 5 accounts, the sad reality could be if you step back, you're doing discounted consulting. And that's where you get that check. Like you really check yourself mentally and say, how does the second and the third customer become easier? And how do you actually, most founders don't take vacation, and that's a really sad thing. That's a sad reality. How do you take vacation? That should be the first milestone. Greg's taking vacation 6 months into the startup. Then we'd all celebrate on this call. Like, Greg did something to scale, and scaling is hard.
Go for Makiko.
Yeah, and it's to reiterate sort of like Ben's points, right? So it's funny. So the start was passed, so I'm doing something like different now on the side. That is a lot more manufacturing and distribution heavy. It's not technology, right? But I think, one point is in terms of like, do you raise? So for example, MailChimp, whose opinions I do not represent, and safe harbor legal, yada, yada, yada. I don't speak for them, right? But they're a private company and they've been private for 20 years and they don't do any VC funding. And a lot of times when they're asked, why haven't you done VC funding? They said, well, because we started MailChimp during the .com boom, or sorry, .com bust, not boom, bust. And no VC was willing to fund it. So they kept it as a side thing, and they still kind of did consulting, whatever, to pay the bills. And eventually it made more money than they did, and da-da-da. So, there's a whole spiel, but for them, right, like they don't have VC funding because it was not available to them. And as a result, it has created a very, in some ways, unique company where they're not tied to the same sort of goals of, every quarter we have to post profits. Well, we don't, because we don't release them publicly. But they still made $600 million in revenue last year. And that I can talk about because they did talk about that in a blog post, right? For me, if I was to do a startup, and very similar to Ben, I think I would probably raise early as hard as possible. I would get an MVP as soon as possible. And talk about tech debt, screw that, right? Like don't even worry about tech debt, like build something, get it in front of people. No, and that was one of the things that killed us, was that we were trying to go for like perfection and robustness. And I'm like, we should have just created like a bunch of not even like developed a bunch of models. We should have just like taken off the shelf models like Roberta's or something like that, use it in MVP, but showed how it could be solve like a pain point. And then we should have raised to get like the security and like the engineering and DevOps resources that we needed. Because the other part too, right, is if you can raise, and there's a lot of research out there. You can look at A16, which is the Anderson Horowitz website. There's a few others that you can look at. But like if you raise like, I think like a certain level of funding in like your seed stage, et cetera, right? Like that's like a really good signal to, engineers or to designers or to marketers or growth people that like, oh, like this startup knows what they're doing. So a lot of times those employees are willing to join if like they get more equity and less cash, right? They might not do sweat equity. A lot of times that's like the co-founders do sweat equity. But if you can raise a certain amount early on, that already is a signal. So in a way, like you can get that talent and you can build up that infrastructure. And then you can just focus on like, how do we get from 0 to 1? And then how do we get from 1 to like 100, 1,000, all that. And it really depends also on your favorite flavor profile. Now, the other thing too, that I would probably do differently, honestly, is that it is such a hard road. It is so hard. Like I was working on it for about a year. And this is after having worked at a bunch of early stage startups. So I thought I knew my shit, right? Because I had been in IC, I'd never been in the founder position, but I worked in early stage startups. So I thought I knew what I was doing. But I was working on it for a year as a side, right? So in a way I was tricking myself into thinking like, oh yeah, it's going well. And yeah, it's going well because I had a full-time job. So I was paying my rent and all that other stuff. So when I quit my job to go try to get it over the finish line for 6 months, that's when the panic started to hit. And I was like, oh man, like we're not making the progress on the roadmap that we should be. And then all these other issues like started popping up and all that. It's like how with work from home, you saw a bunch of couples like divorcing because now like both the husband and wife or wife and wife and husband were at home with the kids and they're like, oh, we actually don't like each other all that much. And you kind of got that like from work from home. And it was very, very similar working on the startup. Like if you are working on it part-time, you could trick yourself into thinking that it's going places. So on the one hand, you keep your job, you can, you can mitigate risk, but also if you are not sort of immersing yourself in it, you might not really be seeing kind of like the red flags and the blind spots that is ultimately like get you. And I 6 months after that made the decision to I'm gonna go get a full-time job again because I need medical insurance, I need money. But next time I probably wouldn't do it unless I was like really passionate about the product. And it doesn't have to be like it's world saving, but I'm like, next time I gotta love this shit. I gotta be really passionate about it because it's gonna be hard no matter, even if you do everything right. Even if you do everything right, it's gonna be hard, but I still think it's worth it. It's worth it once in your life to try it.
Ben, go for it. Then after Ben, we'll go to Mark.
Makiko says something that stood out to me, and that's sometimes we over-engineer. Like we're working on a startup, we're overthinking it. And I remember with my co-founder when Model View controllers came out with SQL, I started back in 2003. So for me, that was very confusing. I'm like, oh man, these Model View controllers. I just want to write my raw SQL. And I had an opportunity to talk to Eric Rees. He wrote the Lean Startup, and I asked him about this, about the technical debt of writing out raw SQL queries. And he said, you know what, the funny thing about technical debt, especially in a startup sense, sometimes that debt never comes due. And so the important point that's screaming right there, with technical debt in a startup, you should never over-engineer anything because you have no validation. The fact that a single customer is using something. So my recommendation to people is don't just do an MVP, do like an SMVP, do a shitty MVP. And so if you're building it out, if you can't tell me like, yes, if you sneeze, if there is an update, if you do anything, this will break. But currently today for this demo, for this customer, this works. You can land the customer, you can improve, you can actually react to a customer fire. If they're pissed at you because the product's not working, you can jump in and fix it. But I think too many founders, they want to like do Kubernetes, auto scaling, like all these technologies that you should be using. And the thing that is so sad about that is you don't have 1,000 customers. You're fighting for 3. So like that is like the alarm bells going off. Like you're fighting for 3 customers. I know there's all these sexy technologies. The technical debt may not come due. And so celebrate technical debt early on. Get rid of it later.
I think I might be starting a startup after this with all this advice. Mark, go for it.
Again, Mikiko's awesome advice inspired a thought of mine, and just talking about how much being a founder, like it's really glamorized online, but it really sucks. And again, similar thing, I was at startups and like I've been around friends who had startups. I'm like, they're totally doing it, I can do it too. And when we were applying to Y Combinator, part of it is you get $100,000 for your startup. It's like a seed round essentially. And when we got into the final round for interviews, it was going to be like the no-go after an interview. And leading up to that interview, I was both excited, but also having like panic attacks because I knew that if I got the money, shit would hit the fan. not in the sense of like, well, yeah, everything, because it is startup, everything's on fire, but because then it'll be real. I took money and I have to deliver, and there's only 100K for our business and our 3 co-founders. So I'm gonna be living, I'm gonna have to convince my wife that we're gonna move back into my parents' house so we could like actually pursue this business, and like basically drop everything. And like I was passionate about the idea, so like I was willing to take that sacrifice. But I think a lot of people don't realize the amount of sacrifice it requires to actually do that, because they have like the founder's salary. And I think a lot of people don't take that account as well. It's like, can you handle 6 months of just having like non-existent pay or vacation or anything like that? And that was like a profile too that a lot of like when we're talking to angel investors, like one of the things they're asking is like, how hungry are you? Are you willing just to like work 80, 90 hours? Because if not, I don't want to give you money. They should have just told us that, which is completely fair. And so, that's just something that Makiko's kind of remind me of. It's just like, also for the founder profiles, are you willing to do it? And ultimately I came to the decision of like, after we didn't get it into Y Combinator, we still had traction for potential customers, but because our product was selling to pharmacists, it was like during the 8 to 5. So I was like, I can't work full time. I'm at an inflection point. Either I go all in on this or it's not going to work at all. And I couldn't afford to be a founder. It just didn't work out. And that was a tough pill to swallow for myself. And it really put into perspective, like I put in like 6 months of work into this only to be like, oh, I can't afford to pursue this. And so now in my head, I'm like, how can I better prepare myself to make that jump as a founder?
Yeah, I'm gonna go to Marina after this, but I mean, just to quote Naval Ravikant when he talks about taking VC money, uh, he says, "If you fail, what's the big deal? You lost a few $1 million of investor money, and they've got plenty more, and that's the bet they take on the chances that you will succeed." So yeah, what's the big deal? Lost a few $1 million of investor money. They got plenty more. Marina, go for it.
Yeah, I think, I'm gonna kind of like reiterate on some of the points, but basically, so I'm sometimes advising for startups I've been in front of, and I will like to try. But the main thing that I see is that if I see a team, like they are not able to build something and get customers, like like the technology, who cares about the technology? So this started with like how data science, or as a data scientist, who cares? Like to me is, if you have an idea, right, it's a good idea, then you have a kind of like a good team, right? Especially if you are at the beginning. I'm not assuming you are going to have the best team yet, but at least, and you can have a product, or whatever, like this CTMVP. So get something that works, and don't be like too wide. Like I have seen so many people that try to do like a million things, and for sure these people will never go anywhere. You have to be very like laser focused on what you want to, not trying to cover everything, but laser focused. Then you get your few customers that are going to be your like raving fans. If you see that, then that has probably a lot of chances to at least move forward, right? But the other thing is that many people come with ideas, like everybody has an idea. They think that like, well, I'm an entrepreneur, and like it's so glamorized, right? So, and then they didn't even think many of the ideas are not even scalable. Like it's just, okay, that's good. Like especially I also come from academia. Believe me, there are many things that are not scalable, or whatever you try is in such a small thing that will never go anywhere, right? And in terms of finances, I mean, that's something I don't know, but you probably don't want to dilute yourself too much too quick. That's I will say, you want to hold on, right? And the team, if you don't have a founder that will, like is so passionate, that has left everything and is doing that, then that's not going to go anywhere. No matter how beautiful it is and how great is the idea, that's, it's not, is you have to have a passionate person in the team that just, like by that will also build the culture and the mission, right? Because that's also like part of the things that, I think are important, is to have a good mission, like, and that is going to build the culture of the company, right? But yeah. So to me, like the first question was about being data scientist. I mean, you can be anything. It's just, I don't think it's relevant the fact that you are data scientist or doctor, or you are, I don't know, whatever. It's just those are tools that you are going to use later. And yes, at some point, if it's data center, then you need a good, tech person, a good, or CTO, or yes. But I think that's secondary to the fact that you still need a good idea, right? And, like a focused, narrow problem to solve, and raving fans, right? So you're raving customers. So.
Very, very good advice. Thank you very much, Marina. And also love the shirt. I'm the coolest person you'll ever meet. That is a good shirt. Vin, go for it.
Yeah, so my first business in college, Trainwreck. So I'm not speaking from a position of perfection by any stretch of the imagination. In Reno, in 2008, 2009, the startup scene kind of started seeping into Reno, and you couldn't get a gold mine funded. That was the joke, is that in Reno you couldn't get a gold mine funded. And we had, everybody from the government trying to beg VCs to come in and fund companies. And it didn't work. Nobody wanted to fund anything that came out of Reno. And so we had two kind of founders. One founder left Reno, went to the Bay Area, and just founded their business where there was money and where people were looking to fund businesses. The other half, and I'm one of that other half, we just stayed here and figured out how to bootstrap businesses. And our perspective on startups is so different than all of the other startup Silicon Alley and all of these other places. Our perspective on startups, and there's a lot of, Reno's out there. Reno's not the only unique little ecosystem, but we all took a completely different approach. And I mean, one of the things that we did was we let customers talk us into starting businesses. And there's a few people in Reno who have, I think there's one of them is a 3-time founder, 3-time exit. And he just let his customers talk him into starting a business. And there's always need. And if you are good at connecting with customers, you don't need to connect with VCs. They'll come find you because you have product, you have market share, you have passionate customers who are your evangelists. They're your marketing department. And, talking about, building off of some of what Marina said, you got an idea that's awesome, great, but your customers really have to have the idea. Your customers have to be passionate about this thing or they won't buy it. And there has to be a business there, not just a product. You have to be able to create a business and sustain the business and do all of the things that, businesses do outside of Silicon Valley, outside of the VC world, outside of the startup culture and startup mentality and startup thought process. And so remember, you're building a business, your customers are going to build it. They'll give you the ideas. Not all of us are going to start like an Apple where we're telling people you need an iPhone. That's really rare. Most businesses don't do that. And everyone says, oh, those are the only ones that scale. No, not at all. You can watch a just traditional idea, organic type of business using technology of any sort scale ridiculously if they have a passionate customer base and they build a business first and then create products that their customers love. And they cultivate and grow a market and do the things that a normal business does. So as much as everyone wants to come at it from a startup perspective, I mean, it's just as relevant to come at it from a business perspective. I mean, pretend you're back in the 1930s. How would they do it then when there were no VCs and banks told you get out? Like, how would you do it? How did they start businesses back then? And sometimes it's good to look at your business from a different perspective like that, because a lot of the startup stuff is hype. A lot of the startup stuff that you get pulled into and the VC stuff you get pulled into is noise. And if you do the fundamentals and you do the strategy and you build the business like a business, sometimes that stuff takes care of itself. And obviously you want funding, you want VCs interested, you want ridiculous scale, you want a lot of this stuff. But at the same time, you're also building a business. And it's really hard to deny somebody funding when they've got customers, got a great product, and got a solid, substantial running business. It's real hard to say no to that person. So, I mean, always think about it from a different perspective, not just the traditional startup and VC route. I mean, pretend you live in Reno and no one will fund your gold mine. And you got to figure it out. Sometimes that's what being a founder is. It's just figuring it out, when those alternatives aren't viable, just admit they're not and move forward, move past them.
Thank you very much, Finn. Man, so it's a lot of great tips, a lot of great advice given today. Greg, I'll toss it back to you, see if you have any follow-up questions or comments or anything.
No, I think that gives me a lot to think about. Ultimately, I'd like to do either or, whether continue to help startups or also found my own startup. And in a situation I'm in right now, as I said in the comments, I think to the part local that Ben alluded to, I'm trying my best to hang on to a little bit of it, and having responsibilities doesn't make that easy. So, but I do believe for anything you want to do, there's always a strategy that works where you can minimize some sort of risk. Not completely eliminating them. I don't think I can eliminate them, but at some point, I think this is one of those sessions where I'm going to have to view it to extract some more insights from it, because I really enjoyed listening to each and every one of you. So thank you.
And I
Yeah,
think
Greg. Yeah, go for it, Makiko.
like that idea of risk, right? I mean, I think everyone has sort of a different like flavor version of risk. So Ramit Sethi talks about the rich life, right? And I remember when I first started reading him, I was like, God, this guy's such an arrogant ass. But the info was so good because I think, I mean, like, you know, my parents were either not college educated or they were, you know, they would like never like had a college degree, or my mom, like she's a Asian female, you know, so I've seen a lot of these experiences where like they could not, there were certain kinds of risk they could not afford. One kind of risk was, you know, telling like their bosses to go f themselves, because hey, you know what, my mom had like a husband to support, you know, when he was doing his consulting business, and a daughter to put through college, right? Like, or you know, other things like that. So you know, for them, like, and for that generation, like they had a different idea of risk. For me, when I like quit my job to go work on the startup, I had made that decision after closing sort of like final or near final round interviews with like 5 other companies that were competitors in that space, for like as a data scientist or like a ML engineer. So I'm like, okay, worst case scenario is if I fail at this, I can take that information and I can bring it to this domain space, or even, you know, other companies, and I've got money and I've got a very supportive partner, you know, who didn't understand it. So like for everyone, risk is very relative, right? So just because someone says like, oh, this is not a good idea to me, it doesn't mean it won't be a good idea to you, right? Because when I quit my job, like in the middle of a pandemic, my parents, and I didn't like it. I didn't like the job. I want to work on startup. My parents were like house, family, kids? Like, how do you do that? But for me, right, it was very informed because I'm like, look, worst case scenario is I go get a job, or, you know, whatever, I build that savings back up. You know, it's all good. And the nice thing about being an advisor is you can learn kind of from like other people's mistakes and sort of like really think it through. And if it's something that like you feel like very, very like strongly passionate about, there's tons of ways to like mitigate that risk even further through the information gathering. I think something that I kind of learned in some ways is that being an entrepreneur, it's like this really kind of crazy sort of roller coaster of being, you have to be just optimistic enough, just optimistic and crazy enough to think the idea could work. But you also have to, at the same time, kind of have the split personality where you have to be like the most negative Nancy in the world, where you're like, I think this could like put it off the rails. This could really, I could get sued for a lot of money for this. So you have to be sort of like optimistic, and like you have to kind of believe in your chances, but at the same time, really be honest with yourself about like, here are the areas that could ding me. How do I sort of, you know, like, how do I mitigate this, or how do I do that? And it's like a really weird sort of, it's a little bit of a weird seesaw. And I think, you know, as long as you can kind of have a foot in both of those areas, that will definitely help, as well as keeping in mind like what is kind of your own personal risk curve and what is your own personal journey. Like, I have some stuff I work on right now that people would probably look at that and they go like, you're an engineer and you're wasting your time on that. Like, you get paid like $5,000-$10,000 for consulting. And I'm like, yeah, but I love this thing. I think about it. I dream about it. I have books about this stuff, you know? So at the end of the day, I would feel so bad if I didn't pursue the idea in some form. Like, it doesn't have to be a full-blown business, but, you know, if anything, like, if quarantine taught us anything, right, it was the fact that like you don't always have tomorrow, you don't always have like a year even from now. So if you have these kind of lingering questions or doubts, they can kind of like eat at you after a time, you know? So that's kind of like my sort of 2 cents. I'm sure it's also why it's how I'm justifying my stuff to myself too, right? So
Yeah, be rationally optimistic, right? That's the key, I think. Excellent insight, excellent conversation, Greg. Thanks so much for kicking off this discussion. This is probably more than what most people will learn in their MBA programs, what you guys have been talking about today. So thank you for that great discussion. Any last minute questions before we start wrapping it up? Yes, Ramit Sethi is from Sacramento. Yeah, that's true. I tried to pull the Sacramento and Punjabi and Sikh card on him to get him on the podcast. No response. He does not care. Well, go for it, Ben.
I was going to tell the group, sometimes data science becomes crazy. So data science, we think of like coding away in a notebook and doing all this stuff. So I actually have to go buy a satellite transceiver, all this gear, and drive up drinking a bunch of coffee into the middle of Wyoming and go hike 10 miles and fish, not for fun, but for data science. Because there's a project coming up in 3 weeks. And so I'm actually going out to like prove out this concept with cameras and capture and teaching AI to like study a fly fishing cast. And it's just hilarious. Like, I don't know. I don't know if that's useful for anyone, but it's just like, I've never used a satellite transceiver and I'm thinking about bears. And I bet if I buy a gun on the corporate credit card, I'll get in trouble. So I probably won't buy a gun. I'll get some bear spray. So it's just like, I don't know. I don't know if that's useful for people, but sometimes data science can take you into wacky places that don't make any sense.
I did not realize you were doing that for your work. It's more interesting now that you now have to say that.
Well, it's actually just a pre-hike assessment because I'm taking a big group up there in 3 weeks, and there's like emails with lawyers trying to figure out like risk, like actually having to tell lawyers about like bears and different things is really interesting. And yeah, it'll be hilarious. If I don't come back, if I get eaten by a bear, just know that there were lawyers at Data Robot that had to deal with, I don't know if they have, it'll just be funny.
So, but the focus is going to be on the fly fishing.
Yeah, the focus is on predicting if we can catch a fish on a particular cast using all of the known information outside of the casting window. So like the 15-second casting window with a dry fly, in addition to recency, wind, all of these features that people that like fishing think they know. But unfortunately, we could have done this next to like a fish hatchery, or we could have like floated down the Snake River or the Green, but there's no hero's journey in that. So me, like a dumbass, I said, this story will be way more interesting if there's a hero's journey. Apparently that hero's journey is like a 20-mile round trip hike. And so I'm going to get my ass kicked tomorrow and I'll return and report like Sunday. But the thing that's hilarious are the other people I'm signing up for this ass kicking in 3 weeks. Anyway, some of my decisions are not well thought out, but we see where they end up. It'll be really interesting to see what I can tell you guys in 3 weeks when we actually do this. It'll either be a huge success or a bunch of like lawyer told you so's.
Ben in the Woods returns.
That's right.
Ben in the Wood returns.
Lawyers are
luck to you. But I'm pretty sure it's going to be a success. So best of luck to you. But it makes me wonder, what business model can't data science solve, right? Because when you describe this thing you're trying to solve with data science, I'm like, is there something that's complex that we call complex that data science can't take a stab at? It's crazy. Like, I guess there's plenty of work for us to do, right? So we don't have any work.
I'm a big fan of bringing data science into your daily likes and passions. So another example would be like, if you like wake surfing behind a Mastercraft boat, why not have data science tune the wake for you? Like tell you the trim of the boat and tell you where people should sit on the boat. Like these are things that people think they know, they have intuition. You could actually have data science like processing that in real time. And so my goal is, how do we come up with these projects that
crafts out of craftsmanship? What are you doing with that? Stirring up and like accidentally cutting your knife while you're trying to like, create a bag or something like that with like a Bowie knife. That's what it's about. Like, oh, I cut my thumb. Oh no.
I just want my droid in the future to go backpacking into the Wind Rivers and fly fish for me and then fly them home. Or I guess it'll be a droid, right? Or a drone.
Or a Tesla bot.
Yeah, it'll be the Tesla bot. And I'll be in my VR space where I'm just drooling away for days.
So that's interesting. So you're gonna take pretty much all of the data from the just IoT type of data, 15-second window, and predict if you can catch a fish, but you're not going to test and see if fish are already there, right? Because wouldn't that kind of be like data leakage? Because you can't when you're casting the reel. Right? I'm just thinking about the actual end use application of this. Can I have like a fishing reel that I toss out that'll then give me a probability that I will catch a fish? Like
you could. So when this is done, when the cast hits the water, you would have like a real-time probability Because a lot of times when you cast, like, do you leave it there for 5 seconds, 10 seconds? Do you need to move to another side of the lake? Like, are you just wasting your time? Do you need to change a fly? So all of this stuff is up in the air while we're trying to bring this together.
Are you predicting the probability that the fish will be there given the condition, or the probability that this particular cast will catch a
Particular
fish?
cast. So each cast is its own observation. So I've been having a lot of fun lately with these temporal windows. So, in a 15-second window buffer, in addition to the non-video data, can you teach, this is an example of something that speaks to people's souls. So if you enjoy fly fishing, this is like a near spiritual thing for you. And the place we're going is Circa the Towers. And if you talk to anyone that's been there, they're like, oh, that's an ass kick. Why are you going there? I'm just like, I don't know. Because things get more interesting, right?
Sounds like a lot of fun, man.
It's all about, it has to be memorable, right? If you can check the memorable box, you've won, even if there's some suffering involved.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting, really fascinating. I'd love to see how that would work, man. Love to.
You're all invited tonight.
If I can get there. Shout out to Ku Ping in the building. Ku, what's going on, my man? Good to see you here again. We're right about to wrap it up, but if there are any last minute questions, now is the time. Ask.
No questions, but I'd like to say good morning to everyone here.
Hey,
I just hop on the call.
Hey,
yeah, just hop onto
man.
the call. Yeah.
Thanks for coming, man. Thanks for joining in. Sorry that we're about to wrap it up, but I appreciate you dropping in, man.
No worries. Yeah, just come on to say good morning to everyone.
I actually have a quick question.
Yeah, go for it.
Hopefully it's quick, but essentially I'm starting to do some more teaching around data science and various things. And I was just curious if anyone has any books or resources, not to get better at necessarily like data science, but to get better at teaching and breaking down concepts. If you have any kind of reference points, if there's a better way to go about it. And, I keep on iterating on different lesson plans. Every single time I teach someone something, I take notes. I'm like, oh, that worked, that didn't work. But it would be cool if there's already some figured out framework, that people use that I can kind of iterate on top of.
It's a good question, man. I don't know if a framework, have you tried to look into some literature for just like teachers to design math curriculum and to try to see what they use? I mean, two things that are coming, like there's like 3 resources I would recommend that come to mind, but none of them like have probably that structure that you're looking for. One would be just How to Solve It by G. Polia. I can get you a PDF copy of that book if you'd like.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah. Then another one I'd say maybe the Barbara Oakley book, A Mind for Numbers. But those are more books just on how to learn and how to solve problems, which you could probably take and teach those same things in your data science course. But yeah, I'll flip it over to the audience and the participants rather, if you guys have any suggestions. Manny or Ku?
I don't have any particular suggestions, but my mom is a special ed teacher. So I can ask her and reach out to her, and she may have some resources because she does it for a living. So I can reach out, and I'm sure she has some resources. So Mark, I'll sync up with you sometime next week.
Mark, this is Jaya.
Oh, hi.
Yeah, so I was an instructional designer for like 11 years. And, when you design courses and instructions, I think first step is to understand your audience, know your audience, and like kind of do a little research about the people you're going to teach. I think that will make a huge difference in how you design your course, because people, you need to know whether they're beginners or somewhere in the middle, or if they're advanced. I think that would be the first step. I would say talk to the people that you're going to teach, what they're looking for. That would be my first step. And then based on the answers that they give, how much Python they know, how much, machine learning they know, those kind of stuff, that can kind of give you an idea about where they're coming from. And then you design your courses based on that. So definitely the first step is talking to the people that give you a lot of answers, for sure.
Oh, that's super helpful. Yeah, and that to give further context, and also
Yeah, because
before
what
this, I'm
happens?
doing. Oh, go ahead.
Mhm. Yeah, what happens is most people jump into the content before even reaching out to the audience. I've taken a lot of data science courses. Some are good, some are just so advanced, and some are like in between. Partly because, you know, I'm talking about MOOCs over here, you know, the like Coursera, Udacity, and they have this set way of doing teaching classes, right? And you take it, and the audience are like so big and vast. Like, you know, you have beginners and, you know, advanced, and the beginners find it's too hard. The advanced people find it's too easy, and then the people in between, like, you know, finding their way through. So yeah, so coming from an instructional design perspective, talking to your audience and seeing what they want, it's crucial. So that will really help in formulating your courses, and your courses might be super successful knowing what they want. So
That's super helpful. And I think you hit on the point that I'm currently struggling with, is that I'm currently mentoring a set of 4 people, and that's like my first practice at like doing the teaching and whatnot. And you know, a couple of them were like really beginner new, and a couple of them are like really advanced. And so trying to find a sweet spot between that, it's been very challenging. It's been some lessons learned on my end. But
yeah, so
awesome. This is so helpful.
Yeah, I used to work for a digital entertainment company, and I was supposed to train. We have all this digital entertainment products that come out of the company, and we had to kind of design courses based on technical folks and then based on the end users and stuff like that. So end users, they don't want to know the technical jargon. So you got to really kind of change the whole technical thing into more end user type of lessons. So, and if it's technical, then of course it'll be more technical, but still it has to make sense to them. So I learned the hard way of not just designing courses, not knowing my audience. And, you know, sometimes people don't like the courses you produce, and sometimes people love it. But yeah, knowing your audience is super critical.
Yeah, maybe if I may add, so I do quite a fair bit of training and all this. But generally what I found to be quite useful is maybe 1 or 2 books on classroom management if you're doing classroom style kind of teaching. That's one. The other one is actually it coincides with what I'm currently sort of researching on, and that is how people learn, cognitive science. So I think it would be good for you to pick up a few. I can't remember, there was this book with the title How We Learn or something along that line kind. Probably I need a bit more time to search. If you can, maybe you can drop me a message on LinkedIn or something. Once I found the book, I can share with you. So that book is pretty good in a sense that it actually shares like how we humans actually learn stuff, and it's something you can pick up and even maybe help them with certain learning techniques, right? That is even useful after the class as well. So to put it in a nutshell, it actually says that we humans, we learn differently, and there's a cycle. There's a cycle of picking up, and there's a cycle of sort of letting the material sort of settle in your mind. So that's the 2 sort of phases of learning. I think it's a pretty interesting book. Yeah. So drop me a message on LinkedIn, and I can share more with you. Yeah.
The other thing, Mark, that you could, the other thing, Mark, you could do, you can design like a small course and then just let people test it. Like you get a few people and let them look at your course, and then, you know, they will give you feedback, what they like, what they did not like. And I did that quite a bit, especially when I was designing training, learning websites and stuff. Like you can have a bunch of people, and these people can come from different groups. It could be the executive team, that could be the actual people who are going to use your training materials, and then the managers. They all will give you different things, say different things, but finally at the end result will be, who is this course for? Those are the people that you want to target and kind of hone in and make it good, I guess.
And Mark, you said that these were like kind of like newbies a little bit.
For my mentees, newbies, but for this more formalized course, it's relatively new people to the analytics space.
Okay. I think something that like really helps, just from also some of the resources I've seen just go wild, Like, so for example, Made with ML, that's like one really, really popular resource. Like in the ML space, there's a few others, full stack deep learning and all that. Some of the guiding principles I think that are really useful are, first off, build intuition before you go into jargon. So there's this, right, like, yeah. So like, I think a lot of engineers or technical people, they can sometimes get like, you know, too much into the details. And a lot of times I think where probably new people struggle, and where I certainly struggled, was being able to place the information into like a concept map or into like a development workflow or things like that. So I would say start from high to low, and then frame all your sort of like, try to frame your information as much as possible around why. So Eric posted right about in the comments, talked about how like he kind of comes back to why. And I think the reality is that for me, like when I'm learning, if I have no value, if there's no like reason for me to know information, I will not remember it. So if you can kind of like essentially guide them along the journey of, in a way, like they're asking themselves why, and your content's kind of in your course is providing the answer, then I think that will also go a long way towards helping. Because I see some courses where they just literally copy paste from like the Tableau website, and I'm like, I mean, why the hell should they pay for material, right? Like they are coming to you for a reason, and that reason is probably because they need a further sort of like breakdown as to like the content or the problem or the topics that your course is targeting. So I would say like start high, then go to low, build the intuition before you go to like code examples, and try to connect it back to your experience, like working in an industry, right? Because, and I think everyone's had this experience, right, where like someone puts up a hypothetical example, right? Like Sally has asked, you know, Barry for $1,000 to do XYZ, and then you split it and you do compound interest and blah, 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 blah. Well, okay, that's great. Except once again, they could probably copy paste that kind of textbook example. But where you could kind of add value is you don't have to do the full details of like stuff that you experienced right at work, right? And DA and all that, right? But what you could do is you could sort of frame it in a like, you know, here is like, right, the STAR framework or whatever, right? Here is a situation. Here was what the problem was. Here are the relevant facts, right? Like, but weave those sort of concepts in. Two books I think that do a really good job of that. Now, let me just walk back to my like library. Are actually like business case study books, because they're really good at those kinds of like building those stories such that you have a problem to solve. So one of them is
Case in point.
Case in point, yeah.
Yeah.
And then the other one is the case study handbook from Elite, or it's the HBR one, Harvard, the Harvard Business School one. I think those two are like really good examples of like stories and how they sort of like frame stuff up. So I think, yeah, I think those would be my like 3 pieces of advice. You definitely don't want to do something like generic that people have seen a million times. And like the best way to make it not generic is to incorporate your own sort of experiences and your whys, especially around why that information is important, right? Why is it important to know a z-test? Why is it important to understand the distribution? You know, why is it important to make sure that your data is clean? And you can pull in like real examples, right? If your data is not clean, if you have bias in the data set, well, you know, that's how you get banks that lend out loans on different interest rates depending on the color of the receiver, right? Like that's something that people can kind of relate to, like, oh shit, this is like really not good. So yeah.
This is also helpful, everyone. This is really great. Yeah, just try and jump into new things and learn as I go.
Right on, man. Hey, let's go ahead and wrap it up. Great questions today. Great session. Thank you guys for joining in. Thank you for sticking around almost 2 hours. And shout out to everybody that's been watching on LinkedIn and YouTube and everything. Don't forget to tune into the episode I released today with David Benjamin. It's all about cracking complexity. His book is it's a great book. And if you have the Audible premium membership, whatever it is, it's available for free on that. So definitely go get that book. And then also did an episode earlier this week with Or Lenchner that's going to be released next week. So definitely go ahead and tune into that. Guys, take care. Have a good rest of the evening. Remember, my friends, you've got one life on this planet. Why not try to do something big? Cheers, everyone. Mark wrote notes. Let me get those notes. I'll put them in the show notes.